together as a committee that we begin Chairman Comer's therapy session, right? You know, a member of the other side wanted to confirm what the title of the hearing was, right? That Chinese propaganda. Well, we know the title of the hearing certainly isn't about impeachment anymore. And Chairman Comer has suffered tremendous loss. And we all know in our life what it's like to suffer tremendous loss. There's all sorts of different stages of grief, and that's the loss, obviously, of his impeachment hearing. And everyone deals with that different ways, and sometimes it takes time to grieve and struggle and fill that hole, that void that now exists now that he no longer has impeachment. But the only way we as a committee are going to help Chairman Comer get better is we have to get to the root cause, right? So for today's therapy session, okay, I want to talk about denial, right? The denial that the impeachment hearings are over. And the denial, obviously, that he started with the 1023 form, which was Russian disinformation. And so, you know, Chairman Comer, psychology teaches us that, you know, someone might be, like him, using denial as a defense mechanism. And signs include that you refuse to talk about the problem, you find ways to justify your behavior, you blame other people or outside forces for causing the problem, you persist in your behavior despite the consequences, you promise to address the problem maybe in the future, or you avoid thinking about the problem. And so in addition to these signs that Chairman Comer has been displaying, as we saw in the beginning, you know, he also might be feeling hopeless or helpless. I just want the chairman to know that we're pulling for him. We really are. I know it's been hard to become someone who was used by the Russians, but the good news is that he set this hearing today on Chinese propaganda because we've already lost him to Russian propaganda. I mean, we got to build a force field around the chairman to make sure we don't lose him to Chinese propaganda as well. And in fact, you can see behind me, these are quotes from the chairman, Chairman Comer, every single solitary time, and there are hundreds more, that he went on TV in interviews and talked about this 1023 form, which was all Russian disinformation. But we got to make the chairman understand that it's going to be okay. We will get him through this, but he's got to recognize that denial is not just a river in Egypt. He is going to have to face the fact that he was taken by the Russians. Now, I want to address something else that went on in this committee by another member. And I say this as someone whose grandparents escaped the Holocaust. So my grandmother was part of the Kindertransport out of Germany. Her parents were killed in Auschwitz. My grandfather, her husband, escaped Poland from the pogroms. You know, the idea that we pretend that behavior is acceptable and regular. There are no concentration camps in Ukraine. They're not taking babies and shooting them in the air because they're Jewish. There's no gas chambers. There's no ovens. They're not railing people in. They're not ripping gold out of people's mouth. They're not taking stuff out of their home. They're not trying to erase a people. They're Ukrainians. Stop bringing up Nazis and Hitler. The only people who know about Nazis and Hitler are the 10 million people and their families who lost their loved ones, generations of people who were wiped out. It is enough of this disgusting behavior using Nazis as propaganda. You want to talk about Nazis? Get yourself over to the Holocaust Museum. You go see what Nazis did. It's despicable that we use that and we allow it and we sit here like somehow it's regular. Oh, Mr. Chairman, I welcome you back. I'm sorry we were trying to talk together and get you through the hearing, but I look forward potentially to talking to you at a future session. So thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes myself for questions. Mr. Meidas, you mentioned in your testimony that there was a shortage of expertise in the federal government with respect to China. Would you say that our government is ill-prepared for what China currently has with respect to their schemes against our government and our way of life? Does the government have a plan?
I would put it this way, that we are unprepared. We don't have enough China expertise to execute our own policy. So we're using, for example, we were asking a department to enforce a major piece of trade legislation, and yet for a couple of years they were relying on Google Translate for their language resources.
And explain why that's important, that we do have a plan. And that's the purpose of this hearing. And I apologize that there are, clowns like the last questioner that get off topic. But explain why that's important to have a plan.
Well, in some form or another, nearly every federal department has some role to play, whether it's because they fund research and therefore they have a responsibility to maintain the integrity of that research. They have a responsibility in some form to protecting constitutional rights and the exercise of those, which the CCP is attempting to restrict inside the United States. So you can kind of go down through each one and see that.
Exactly. Colonel Newsom, what is unrestricted warfare, China's master plan to destroy America?
What unrestricted warfare refers to is Chinese approach to going after its enemy, and the United States is the one they call their main enemy.
That publication states that the battlefield will be everywhere, right?
That's right.
What does that mean for America?
It means anything goes. We tend to expect a war to start on the day the shooting starts, and we say we're at war. To the Chinese, we're already at war.
You've said that U.S. needs its own political warfare strategy against the Chinese Communist Party. What should that look like?
Well, it needs to be first a comprehensive plan that you use every tool you've got, economic, financial, media, propaganda. But more than anything, you've got to have an awareness you're actually at war. And then you've got to have somebody who's responsible for running it. I can't see who in the USG is the person who does political warfare. I saw a State Department official testifying recently, and you could tell he had no idea about political warfare. But someone's got to be in charge and responsible for it.
So, General Spaulding, how does the Chinese Communist Party differ from the Soviet Union in its approach to political warfare against America?
I don't think it differs in its approach. It differs in the tools it has available to itself. So the Soviet Union was cut off from the global economy. So globalization wasn't a thing, and it wasn't a part of it. And then furthermore, Silicon Valley hadn't developed all the tools of influence and technological reach into our own homes, into each individual citizen. So those tools far surpass anything that were available to the Soviet Union in terms of active measures.
So how could our methods of combating the Soviet Union work against the Chinese Communist Party?
Well, as I mentioned previously, bringing back COCOM, bringing back the U.S. Information Agency, making public diplomacy an independent effort within the executive branch, and then focusing all the agencies and departments of the executive branch on this political warfare. For example, right now you have within the White House, you have the National Security Council focused on national security, you have National Economic Council focused on trade, and they fight over what challenges are coming in because of the Chinese Communist Party. They need to be united.
Is there any existing agency or any existing person within the government, our present government structure, that you would put in charge of trying to educate this administration and the cabinets and the divisions within each cabinet about the potential perils of the CCP?
Well, that's the job of the intelligence agencies, but they're not really focused on political warfare. So unless you get them to basically lead off that effort in terms of explaining to the executive branch what political warfare is, and until you unite all the agencies and departments against this threat, you're not going to do anything against it.
Mr. Meidas, is there, I'll ask each of you, is there a single person or agency in the government that should be in charge of that? Do you agree with the intelligence community, or you have?
I think this is fairly clearly the job of the President, the Secretary of State, the National Security Council, and the supporting staff. And when we have done this well in the past, we had a an integrated system that was looking at what was going on, and we were also looking at the other tools that we had at our disposal. You know, we understood the Marshall Plan as part of political warfare,
Right.
and we understood some of our education and cultural exchange, the idea of putting Americans abroad so that other countries could have a true experience of Americans rather than the Soviet propaganda.
Right. Colonel, do you have a response?
Well, it's a tough challenge. I would say if you run it out of the National Security Council, it could work, but you have to have the right people. Some people who understand it, have that personality that can make it work.
So it looks like you have to have the will. You have to, first of all, understand the threat that China poses. You have to have the will to combat China before we could task agencies and specific people with a business model to combat China's growing influence in the United States. And it's kind of like you have to have a will to secure the border before you can secure the border. So I hope that we can do that. I hope that, you know, we've seen from Representative Khanna and Representative Krishnamurti, who asked serious, credible questions today, and I appreciate that, this is a huge problem in America. And it doesn't sound like our government right now is taking it very seriously, and we need to change that. And I hope that the work of this committee moving forward, and hopefully we can continue to find a couple of reasonable members of the committee on the other side of the aisle to work in a bipartisan manner to see that happens. So that concludes our questioning. I want to thank our witnesses again today for your testimony. With that and without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials.
Mr. Chairman, we're doing closings?
I hadn't planned on it.
Oh, but your staff had told us that we were doing
Okay,
it.
I will yield you, how much you told them?
Just like 45 minutes, something like that. So.
Oh, yeah.
No, I'm happy to take a minute or two, whatever you think we need to close today.
Take a minute.
Yeah, you're very kind and generous, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Professor Snyder, the minority witness, for his truly extraordinary testimony today, which I know will be of great assistance to the committee, for his brilliant scholarship, and above all, for his passionate citizenship, because not everybody would take the time out of the middle of their teaching week to come do it. So thank you. There were several words that recurred through the day. One of them was authoritarianism, one of them was corruption, and one of them was propaganda. And the opposite of all those things is really what we need to be seeking. The opposite of authoritarianism is democracy and freedom. The authoritarian model is all about corruption, and the opposite of that model of government is government in the public interest, for the common good, rather than for the small clique that surrounds the leader and his family, whoever gets into power. They use propaganda in order to prop up the system, in order to fool people, to divide people, to set people against each other. And the opposite of propaganda is education. So I want to thank you, Professor Snyder, for participating in that, and your fellow witnesses for contributing to our education. But one of the ways that we lose to authoritarian states is if they can get their claws into our leaders, either through money or compromise or psychological manipulation. I just want to show you what happens when our leaders cave in to China and to Russia. So here are some of the tweets that were sent out by the last president about President Xi in China. Smart, brilliant, everything perfect. We love each other. Friend of mine, a very, very good man. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. My feeling toward you is an incredibly warm one. A brilliant man. If you went all over Hollywood to look for somebody to play the role of President Xi, you couldn't find it. There's nobody like that. The look, the brain, the whole thing. And here's the ex-president on Putin. His invasion of Ukraine is genius and pretty savvy. Putin was smart. The man has very strong control over a country, a tough cookie with great charm. So we need some democratic self-respect in order to combat the propaganda. And I am also happy that we saw today a few members actually demonstrate what propaganda running through American politicians looks like. Thank you for calling this very significant and important hearing, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Yield back. I'll recognize myself for closing remarks. Again, I want to thank our 3 credible witnesses that were here today to talk about this subject. This is something that this committee's going to take very seriously moving forward. We recognize the fact that our government doesn't have a plan to combat China's growing influence, and we recognize that it doesn't appear they recognize the threat. You know, in the private sector, I'm a farmer. All my life, I've owned farms, graduated from Western Kentucky University with a degree in agriculture. I was commissioner of agriculture in Kentucky, which is an elected statewide office, before I came to Congress. And one of the things I always talked about agriculture was that in agriculture, we were the one industry that had a trade surplus with China. Well, that's changed in the last 12 months. China now has a trade surplus with us in agriculture. And when you talk about national security, there's no greater threat to our national security than the need to have a safe, healthy, reliable food supply. I wanted to mention that because the growing influence of China is now a major threat to every industry in America. Ms. McClain talked about the electric vehicle industry and the dependence on China in that, and that's kind of seems like the position of this administration to push everything to the electric vehicles. Well, that makes us even more dependent on China. That's a problem. The policies are a problem. But we need to recognize the fact that China manipulates our currency. China steals our intellectual property and our patents. So our private companies that invest billions of dollars in research and development, it's all being stolen by the Chinese Communist Party. And then the last thing, our education system in America. What's very concerning to me, and something I didn't know until we started this investigation, was how much anonymous money flows into our research universities in America. And the University of Penn's at the top of the list. And who worked at the University of Penn before they came back to working for the government? The Secretary of State and the current President of the United States. I think this is a problem because what we've seen by Dr. Fox, who's presiding over her own committee hearing down the hall on anti-Semitism in our public universities, is that we've got a lot of indoctrination that's taking place in our universities that's anti-democratic. I believe is what's fueling a lot of the support for Hamas among the seems like growing faction of the Democrat Party now. So this is something.
There's not a single member of our party who supports Hamas.
That seems to be a very huge issue in America, the disinformation campaign that's taking place in our universities, but where's it being funded? And I think that one of the things that we need to focus on in this committee is greater transparency with where all of this money is coming from into these universities. Yes, we've done a decent job identifying the problem with TikTok, and the House has acted on that. But I think we need to go a lot further. And I think that we need better preparedness within our federal government in every agency, whether it's the Department of Agriculture or the Department of Education, the Department of Defense, Department of Energy. Every agency needs to first recognize that we have a threat from China, and secondly, we need to have a plan to combat that threat, to identify when China does something counter to our interest, and then have a plan to combat that. So I think you all did a great job today talking about that. I appreciate your time, and look forward to working with you all in the future.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request I want to introduce into the record the White House's Indo-Pacific strategy released in February of 2022, reaffirming the country's commitment to deterring PRC military aggression in the Taiwan Strait, and a fact sheet detailing the $4 billion requested in the President's budget request for 2025 for a more free, open, and secure Indo-Pacific, bolstering U.S. alliances.
Without objection, so ordered. With that and without objection, all members have 5 legislative days within which to submit materials and additional written questions for the witnesses, which